So with that, we are going to start our afternoon with a presentation by patent student Wayne Boatwright, all the way at the end. Wayne has been a student for 4 years. He's extremely active in patent. He helped organize this conference. And he's also the web manager for San Quentin News. And Wayne will be asking us a question that many of us face, which is how to get over our fear of math, and how the Sudoku puzzle just might hold that answer to that question and to much, much more. So Wayne?
Thank you. That was a wonderful introduction. Yes, I am very pleased that it is finally time to give you this presentation. And I've got to tell you, I'm going to give you an oral presentation. I'm going to tell you a story basically today, with the hope that it will inspire you to read my 6,000-word, 38-foot note paper. Because I'm an academic too, right? I mean, I'm giving you a presentation, but I do want you to read it. It really does cover a lot of fascinating concepts that I've discovered during my time as a PUP student and helping others try to overcome their fear of math. Because there's a lot of people that the impediment we find here is they're not able to take the advanced courses of the Patent University project, or many of them even get their GED because of their inability to do basic mathematics. And so I've always tried to find a way to solve that. The way it's worked for me is I've been a tutor informally, not part of Patent University project, because I live in what's called the H unit. If you guys don't know what H unit is, you're lucky. Right? Yeah. H unit is the dormitory yard of San Quentin. So we have 199 men in my dorm, and there's 200 bunks in my dorm. So you can kind of do the math. By the way, they're double bunks. My last 3 bunkies have been Airplane, Bullet, and Bam Bam. So prison is a different experience, and these are guys who want to learn math. And so I've worked very hard to try to find a way to do that. I mean, what if you could learn math just by playing a simple game? That's the issue. Su means number in Japanese, and doku refers to a single place on the puzzle where the number has to go. If you've never played Sudoku, it's a devilishly easy game. I mean, most of the players can quickly learn a number of simple tactics to figure out how to solve these puzzles. The puzzle contain 81 squares. They have to have a minimum of 17 numbers filled in, and then you've got to fill in the rest of them. Now, I'd mentioned that math is a constant fear for people. And the language I'd like to use, and we're going to practice using today, are 3 basic tools to help people overcome any fear or any bad habit. The first one is narrative. So people have a negative narrative about math. It's merely a habit. That habit is basically a complex feedback loop. It's a positive feedback loop. It's like having the microphone too close to the speakers when you're at a concert. Once that feedback starts, people trigger anxiety, they get very nervous, and suddenly they can't even think about the math that they're doing. Now what Sudoku can do is it can act as a framing mechanism, just this simple puzzle as people play it, that will allow them to develop the ability to actually do and solve problems. Students can gain from the mental rigor of Sudoku, and they can also learn to differentiate between uncertainty, quantified risk, and certainty. Math no longer will require guesswork. They'll be able to find the answer, because that's the great thing about Sudoku. It's a deductive game. There's only one right answer for every cell that you deal with. Just as in math, guess what? One right answer when you do that problem. So this is a great way of training people to actually gain the capacity to create some space in their decision-making process so they can actually think about the problem rather than about their fear of being unable to do math. It takes a lot of practice, which is why I love Sudoku. There are millions of books. I can't think of how many Sudoku books I've given away to people as trying to inspire them to learn how to overcome this fear. And I suggest that if you haven't played Sudoku, first thing you should do is get one and practice it. See how it works. It can break that positive feedback loop, right? Because it allows you to make a decision. Now, how do you get people to want to play a game, right? Not easy. All human nature is to put data into context in order to tell a story. That's how we recreate the world we live in. That's how we make decisions of how we deal with things. And the most common tool of a story, of a narrative, is a metaphor. Because it suggests something and allows that thing to become visible to you. So get ready, guys. Here comes the story. I'm sorry. I'm trying to give you a little signpost here, a lead up here. How many of our outside guests, and again, not the inmates, but how many of our outside guests have been to an IKEA store? And I assume that means you've also assembled a piece of IKEA furniture? How many of my inmate colleagues have been to an IKEA store? A few. I use this as an example to show how a nested narrative works. You have to use a story in multiple different vocabularies for it to actually reach your whole audience. And that's part of narrative. It's an essential element. It's one of the 3 tools that I use, because for 4 years before I started at the San Quentin News, I was the production coordinator of the PIA Furniture Factory. How many of you guys know about the Furniture Factory? How many inmates know about the Furniture Factory that's here at PIA or have worked there, right? So the chairs you're sitting in, that's right. Blame me. I was the guy who was the production coordinator for those chairs. And I learned a lot about furniture making. And I can tell you that if we can compare and contrast how we made furniture in a furniture factory and how IKEA tells you to make furniture, you'll understand exactly why Sudoku can solve fear of math. And it's asking a lot, but you'll get there. I still got 10 minutes, I think. We'll see what time I get for it. But anyway, I'm going to explain to you how it works. Now remember this, when you build furniture, and we build quality furniture, I'll tell you, these chairs are used a heck of a lot. They're moved a lot, they stay together. That's because we use basically 3 different tools when we make furniture. The first one is a type of a hammer. It's the oldest tool there is, right? You take a hammer, you slam something in. We actually use a staple gun and jam it in, but it's the same thing. It's a hammer. The second tool we use is a flathead screwdriver. Flathead screwdrivers are the first screwdrivers to be made. They're made for wood, basically. So you can put it into wood, and it's a big screw. It's made out of iron, not out of steel. If you look at these chairs, you'll see that they've actually got Phillips head screws in them. Phillips head are the most advanced fastener that we use back there at the furniture factory. It's got a prong in it. It's made out of steel, not out of iron, so you can actually put more torque on it. You can put it into more solid stuff. You can use a Phillips screw and you can put it into metal, you can put it into plastic, not just wood like you do with a flathead, or with a staple or a nail. Now these are 3 basic tools that we use making furniture that I would contend that most of mainstream society has forgotten to use because they all go to IKEA. At IKEA, you get this little L-shaped hexagonal tool, the master tool that assembles everything you need for IKEA. And here's the secret you guys don't know out there on the street, because I was the production coordinator for the furniture factory. IKEA uses that tool and that very detailed list of how to solve problems and don't even use words, they just give you maps and little pictures of how to do things, only because they have to create a piece of furniture that can fit in a flat box. The essence of the business model for IKEA is that you have to be able to stack as many boxes on top of each other as possible. So they have to be flat. They have to be full. We build real furniture, so we'll get a box that has a lot of air in it because we've got metal frames and other things we use to make it. But in order to assemble those, we have to use 3 different tools. Again, the 3 basic tools we use, the hammer, the flathead, and the Phillips. And these are the same tools you need if you want to teach math, or learn Sudoku for that matter. The way they work is like this. The hammer, the oldest tool we have, is called narrative. It's the story that we tell. It's what I can do to keep your attention, is to tell you a story about something interesting that makes sense. It follows what's called causality. This is a story that has a beginning, a middle, and the end. And we're getting close to the middle. Feel safe. It's not, it's not over yet, but we're not at the beginning anymore. We're near the middle. You have the hammer, which is the oldest tool. It's the one humans have used forever. But guess what? Taking that nail out is a real pain, and you ruin the wood. So you only want to use it once. It's the narrative that we use to hold our stories together. A narrative, for example, of I'm afraid of math. Or a narrative, hey, I've got something here that could help me overcome my fear of math. Those are both stories. Those are both narratives. You choose which one you use. The hammer's being used either way. The next tool is the flathead. Flathead is a great tool. It allows you to put screws in and take screws out without damaging the product, so you can actually correct your mistakes. And I got to tell you, when I learned the furniture factory, the mistakes I made, it wasn't pleasant for me or anybody else, but because I had to pull all these staples out of these nails out, right? But at least with a flathead, you can take it out. The flathead, in our analogy of learning, we started again with narrative. as you have to tell a story. You have to have a way of keeping continuity and causality for people. The next thing is called risk literacy. People need to know when they're taking a risk and when they're not. They have to have some idea of an uncertainty, unknown, versus a quantifiable risk versus a certainty. Because trust me, in Sudoku, as with math, if you don't get to certainty, you probably got it wrong. There's a one right answer. For every cell in the Sudoku puzzle, there's one right answer for your math problem. That is called risk literacy. You have to be able to educate your students on the concept of going from uncertain to quantifiable risk to certainty. That is a mechanism that you can gain as you do the Sudoku puzzle or do math problems, because if you get it wrong, you have to backtrack and figure out where it was wrong. And when I say certainty, you guys will love this one. This goes back to narrative too. By the way, in my paper, I've got a great narrative about two people. I can't wait till you read it. It's about Fortuna. It's about Fortuna and Sapientia. Fortuna means fortune or fate, and Sapientia means wisdom or knowledge, and how these two women battle each other throughout all time. You know, when are you actually relying on fate, taking a guess, or when do you actually know what you're doing and have certainty, which is what math can give you. And the reason I say that you should look at this is because certainty, Sapientia, wisdom, she uses a mirror. She looks at herself. The great thing about every math problem, the great thing about every Sudoku puzzle, you can check your answer. That's what you're supposed to do. That's what looking at the mirror means. You check the answer, make sure it works. You go back and verify that you got it right. Most people who just guess are so frightened of it, they forget to check their answer. Again, I've embedded in narrative another step of how to actually build a piece of furniture. We can use a hammer and a flathead, and also how to solve a math problem. We have a narrative, and now we've got risk assessment or a risk literacy. The third thing we use, which is the highest tool, the most complex tool, is mental rigor. How do you get people to stay focused on a problem? Nobody wants to. We want to just guess the answer and be done with it, especially if you're afraid or nervous. If you have a math phobia and you have that positive feedback loop where you're nervous, then that's what you do. The advantage of Sudoku is it allows you to overcome that fear, because you have to spend time on Sudoku. In fact, Sudoku has basically 7 basic tactics and 3 complex tactics that you use depending on the complexity of the puzzle to solve it. So you're constantly changing between different tactics as you do the puzzle and fill in the 81 cells with their numbers. That is exactly like math. Math requires you many times to use different tactics. For example, if you have 2 variables, an x and a y, you may need to solve for one of those variables first and then substitute that variable back into the puzzle to get a solution. That's exactly what Sudoku teaches you. Multiple tactics to solve a problem. That's what math does. If you're comfortable with Sudoku, you'll be comfortable with math. You won't be frightened when you take that test. This is the best chance to actually get there. And that is a form of mental rigor that comes with practice, which is why I do at least one Sudoku every day. I recommend everybody do them because it's a fabulous tool to actually get you to where you need to be. Those are the 3 mechanisms, and if you can equate them to the 3 tools, a hammer is like narrative, a flathead, which you use a higher level of technology you can pull in and pull out, as risk literacy. Risk can change. It could be a 90%. Look, there's 1 through 9 numbers. So let's just say that there's a 10% chance of an answer. It's close enough. And if you can guess it down to just possibly 2 numbers in a cell of Sudoku, now you've got a 50% chance. You've changed it. That's just like pulling that screw out and putting it back in a different place. You've changed your risk literacy. But the high end is to actually have the mental rigor to make sure you know the answer. See, the great thing about Sudoku is you don't have to guess. You never have to guess. It's deductive. It allows you to find the answer. In fact, if you're guessing, you're in that risk literacy space. You're with fate and Fortuna. You're spinning the wheel. You should never have to guess at Sudoku. But you might have to use a different tactic as you study it. Just like in math, you may have to use different tactics to learn how to do it. That's the essence of how to do it. Every class should have 4 basic concepts beyond this. And those 4 concepts are thinking critically, mental rigor, thinking creatively, use narrative, use story, communicating effectively. Again, narrative is essential. How do you communicate risk literacy? How do you communicate risk mental rigor? And then interacting effectively. How do we as a class work together to do things? Those are the 4 elements of active learning. Those are the ones you really need to focus on in every class, in every situation. My conclusion is people need to think. They need to simulate the world and plan how to act in it. True thinking is complex and demanding. It involves uncertainty. They must learn to tolerate uncertainty. You have to modify your premises and adjust your thoughts. In consequence, thinking is emotionally painful, as well as psychologically demanding. But more than anything else, right? It's tough, except not thinking. Thinking is what you have to do. And that's paraphrasing Jordan Peterson, if you've ever heard of him. Great guy. Memory is not the description of an objective past. Memory is a tool. Use that memory to guide you in the future. Have the narrative embedded in there so you can learn these tools of how to overcome a math phobia. In conclusion, plain Sudoku puzzles can yield human competency in stark contrast to many psychological theories that think people can't learn these things. Any student can acquire the ability to make deductions about abstract concepts and do math. Thank you very much.
Good job, Wayne.